Chapter 40, From TD to TR. Theodore Roosevelt, who was called TD when he was a boy, was very, very rich and lived in a 5-story house in New York City with his brother and 2 sisters and his mother and father. 4 or 5 servants, sometimes many more, lived in the house too. His uncle, aunt, and cousins lived nearby. If you looked out the front door of the big house onto East 20th Street, you could see cobblestones and horse-pulled carriages and hear city noises. But in the quiet backyard, flowers and strutting peacocks filled a block-long garden. The Roosevelts were an old Dutch family and had been New Yorkers since the day of Peter Stuyvesant. They were aristocratic and proper and spent much of their time with wealthy families like themselves. The Roosevelts all seemed to have something in common. It was energy and high spirits. They liked having a good time. They enjoyed laughing, playing games, and riding horseback. When TD grew up and became president, he brought more laughter to the White House than any president before or since. Young Theodore was a studious boy and an astounding reader. All of his life he read at least a book a day, often more. He had an amazing memory. When he became president, he surprised people with the wide knowledge he had from books. He also loved to write, and before he died at age 60, he wrote some 150,000 letters. He wrote all of his presidential speeches himself. Most presidents have speech writers. And he wrote more than 30 books. But when he was a boy, Theodore Roosevelt expected to become a scientist. His special interest was nature, especially bugs and birds. He set up a natural history museum in his house and kept detailed drawings and records of the animals he observed. Once, a servant complained that she couldn't do the laundry with a snapping turtle tied to the legs of the sink. He was born just before the Civil War, and his first memories were of playing soldier. TD pretended he was a Union soldier. His brothers and sisters were not so sure which side to take. Theodore's father, Theodore Sr., was a strong supporter of Abraham Lincoln and the Union cause. Theodore's mother, Mittie Bullock, was a Georgia girl who grew up on a plantation. She sympathized with the Southern cause. Perhaps it was because of his wife's feelings that Theodore Sr. chose not to fight in the war. He did what many other rich Northern men did. He paid a substitute to fight for him. It was the only thing he ever did that upset his son. The older Theodore, a glass merchant and banker, was a philanthropist, which means he spent much of his time and his money helping others. He set up a program to help soldiers' families. He founded the Children's Aid Society. He helped start the American Museum of Natural History. He aided hospitals, and he worked on other good government causes. He believed that his wealth gave him a special responsibility to be a helpful citizen. His son called him the best man I ever knew. You can see that Theodore Roosevelt had an unusual childhood. When he wanted to learn more about animals and how to stuff them, his parents gave him lessons with a taxidermist who had hunted and worked with the famous artist and naturalist John James Audubon. When the Roosevelts wanted their children to learn about geography and art and history, they took the family on a year's trip to Europe. TD was 10. When he was 14, they spent a winter on a houseboat in the Nile River in Egypt. TD was given a rifle, and he shot and stuffed hundreds of birds. Young Theodore's health was poor. He had asthma, terrible eyesight, and stomach problems. He was frail and sickly, and no one thought he would live long. His father told him he needed to build his body to match his mind. At age 11, he began lifting weights and doing exercises. For the rest of his life, he boxed, rode horseback, hunted, and rode. The weak, scrawny lad had turned himself into a powerful, fearless man. When he was 26, Theodore Roosevelt headed to the West. The North Dakota cowboys chuckled when they saw the young dude from the East with books under his arm. He wore a fringed and beaded buckskin shirt, fringed leather pants, silver spurs engraved with his initials, and alligator boots. Tucked in his belt were a knife and scabbard made custom made at Tiffany's, the finest jewelry store in the nation. One day out on the range, the cowboy figured, and the city slicker would hightail it back east. So a guide took him buffalo hunting. They were gone 7 days, riding the wildest, loneliest, most difficult trails the Dakota Badlands had to offer. It rained most of the time. The days were hot and the nights were frigid. They were charged by a wounded buffalo. Their food ran out. The dude fell into the bed of cactus. Wolves frightened their horses. The horses had to be chased, and they woke one cold morning to find themselves sleeping in 4 inches of water. The guide, Joe Ferris, was close to collapse from exhaustion. But the worse things got, the more the dude seemed to enjoy himself. By Godfrey, this is fun, he kept saying. Roosevelt had dropped his childhood name T.D. and was now signing his letters Thee or Ted or Theodore. Later, when he became president, people would call him T.R. or Teddy. But he was little T.D. when he first dreamed of the West, and after reading adventure books by James Fenimore Cooper, he longed for adventure, but went west for another reason. He went to forget and to begin again. He had lived through a series of tragedies that no young man should have to face. The first tragedy came when he was a college student. He studied hard and passed the entrance exam for Harvard. He expected to be a scientist. Then his beloved father died. That changed his life and his career too. He decided to go into politics to become a responsible citizen, as he believed his father would have wished him to do. Few people with his wealth and education entered politics. They were apt to look down their noses at the people who ran the country. Roosevelt was determined to be a reforming politician. When friends asked why he had gone into politics, he said he wished to be part of the governing, not the governed class. So when he left college, he became a legislator in New York's Assembly, and he got married to sweet-natured Alice Lee. She was like a fairy tale bride, blue-eyed, blonde, and beautiful. They were enchantingly happy. And then, on the same day, it was Valentine's Day, 1884, in the same house, Alice died giving birth to a daughter, and Mittie, Theodore's mother, died of typhoid fever. Mittie was 48, Alice 22. In his diary entry for that day, Roosevelt drew a dark X and wrote, "The light has gone out of my life." 3 days later, he christened the baby Alice Lee and sorrowfully wrote in his diary, "My life has now been lived out." T.R. had no clue to the full and productive life ahead of him. What he did have was resilience and energy, so he went west and threw himself into cowboy life. Out west, T.R. learned to rope steers, wrestle calves, ride bucking ponies. Once a pistol-toting bully threatened him in a bar. Roosevelt, as he later recalled, stood up then, struck quick and hard with my right just to one side of the point of his jaw, hitting with my left as I straightened out, and then again with my right. Next day, the bully left town on a freight train. T.R. could ride 100 miles a day and then sit up all night on watch. If he found someone who he could talk to about books or ideas, he would talk and talk and talk. Roosevelt fell in love with the bleak hunting Dakota Badlands, a strange place of cliffs, ravines, and flat tablelands where survival wasn't easy, even for birds and animals. He may have understood that was his last generation would enjoy that frontier in its natural state. When Roosevelt became president, he did everything he could to save wilderness areas for future generations. He increased the national forest by 40 million acres, created 5 national parks, 16 national monuments, 4 national game refuges, and 51 bird sanctuaries. After hiking with John Muir, he made sure that Yosemite's forests of giant sequoia and redwood trees were saved for the people's children and the children's children. He helped make conservation a popular idea. His first trips west did exactly what they were meant to do. They helped him begin his life again. When he went back east, he was ready to accept a new job as police commissioner of New York. Some people said roping steers was easier. Now he was out walking the streets of New York with writers Jacob Riis and Lincoln Steffens. At night, he could be seen in dangerous areas, making sure the police were doing their job. No police commissioner had done that before. And he married a childhood playmate, Edith Caro. Together, they raised a noisy, happy family of 6 children.